Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised Pepperball hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for Pepperball, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of the Pepperball system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, Pepperball is the first option in my correctional toolbox. With the ability to transition quickly from area saturation to direct impact with the non-lethal PAVA projectiles, Pepperball provides me with a range of non-lethal options for cell extractions involving non-compliant inmates, and when the use of force is over, decontamination is easy, with no oily residue on the walls or floors. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click the show notes below. Pepperball is the safer option first. Welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. Today I have the author of several books, Dan Reynolds. He takes his subjects directly from more than 30 years of correctional experience. Dan started as a case manager and would later take positions as classification auditor, administrative assistant, deputy warden, and finally as warden and administrator over several different prisons and departments for Oklahoma. In his books, he describes his firsthand experiences with Oklahoma State Penitentiary, the rodeo, the riots, and the executions. So please welcome Dan Reynolds to the Prison Officer Podcast. It's good to have you here today, Dan. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. I always start all my interviews the same way because I'm always curious about how people get into corrections. But I've read your book, On the Other Side of the Bars, and I have a little bit of insight into how you got started in corrections or got interested in corrections. But go back and tell me where you grew up and about your life growing up.
Okay, I was born and raised in Norman, Oklahoma. And I've got 6 siblings, and my father was a Ford dealer there in Norman, and had a Ford dealership for years. And I was there in Norman practically all my life and graduated from Norman High School, attended OU for a couple of semesters, and then went to the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond, Oklahoma, just north of Oklahoma City, and got my bachelor's degree there in criminal justice.
Okay. When you were growing up, you didn't have, like your dad didn't work in corrections. You didn't have somebody in your household that worked in corrections, did you?
I didn't realize it until after I became an employee of the Department of Corrections. I learned years later that I had a great-grandfather that was a guard at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in the early 1920s. And when I was actually at the penitentiary, I accessed some historical logbooks that were kept in storage there, and I was actually able to go back and find his name on a payroll stub where he got paid $100 a month working as a guard in 1929. And then I just found out recently, doing some genealogy research, that my great-grandfather had a brother that also worked there as a guard. And so in that respect, I've got some family ties there.
Interesting. That's great to find that stuff out doing your genealogy. But as far as corrections, you kind of happened into finding out what corrections was when you were a teenager, didn't you? Can you tell me that story?
Yes. I'll just kind of start from the beginning, if that's all right. Sure. When I first learned or gained an interest in corrections, I had to do a book report in the 8th grade. And I went to the school library there and found a book, and it was entitled Prisons. And it was just a softback book, and it had a picture of a jail bars, prison bars, and it showed a guy's hand stuck out the food passageway and handcuffed, and that image kind of intrigued me, so I selected that book to do a book report, and always had an interest in it. But my deep interest was always to be a physician, to be a doctor, and I became a volunteer at a hospital, worked in the emergency room, became an EMT, worked at the local ambulance station. I was pre-med at OU, and my dad was paying for my college, and I always did real well in science, made straight A's in science, but if it had any complicated math in it, it just ate my lunch. So I was in a health class one day listening to two guys talk in front of me, and one asked the other what he was majoring in. He said criminal justice, and so I said, boy, that sounds interesting. And so I thought I'd take a couple of classes, and the couple of classes I took, I really enjoyed. And so I said, well, maybe this is a time to change my major. And criminal justice doesn't seem like it's got a whole lot of complicated math in it. So I pursued that, and then finally graduated. But when I was 16 years old, I always told a friend of mine that we would go 2 hours away to Lake Eufaula, where I had some relatives and around the lake. And I said, let's go on a fishing trip as soon as I turned 16, got my license. So that Saturday after I got my license, we were headed for Eufaula early one morning, and we turned on the radio, and we heard there was a prison riot going on in McAlester, Oklahoma. And I said, a prison riot? And I asked my buddy, I said, have you ever seen one? He goes, no. I said, you want to go see one? I said, it's only about 30 miles south of Lake Eufaula. And he said, sure. So we stopped in Eufaula and dropped our bags off, and then we started heading towards McAlester. We didn't know where the prison was, and we could see the smoke. And so we just kind of followed the smoke. And I wasn't familiar with the town of McAlester as well, but we just followed the smoke, and I pulled into a real small, narrow street just east of the prison there, and then I turned right. I was in a little old blue Pinto, and I went as far as I could go in a dead end right there at the East Gate. And I was right at the prison. I was right up close to it. And I could see buildings on fire, smoke coming out of the buildings. I saw Oklahoma National Guard helicopters flying up overhead. Oklahoma National Guardsmen on the wall. I saw inmates lined up along the fence line with a highway patrol vehicle on the outside. And he had a bullhorn, and it appeared he was taking a count, calling inmates' names and numbers there. And I just happened to have a little 110 Instamatic camera in my glove box, and I pulled it out and started taking pictures. And we spent practically all day there, and just watching the riot unfold, and just watching all the activity. And it certainly made an impression on me at such a young age, never realizing that one day I'd actually work there.
Yeah. So it intrigued you instead of scared you, I guess, huh?
Yeah, kind of sparked an interest about what that was all about and what was involved, and what's the reason for all the chaos and the riot, and so I really didn't think too much about it.
So what was your
what had happened after I graduated from the University of Central Oklahoma? I really didn't have a real definite path I wanted to pursue. I applied for the Oklahoma Narcotics Department, alcohol and drugs department. I started filling out the lengthy application to join the FBI, and So I was just
Mm-hmm.
trying to get my resume out there, trying to get interviewed by different law enforcement agencies. And the Department of Corrections was the first one that offered me a job after an interview, and so I took it. I'd been unemployed. I graduated in the summer of 1980, and I was unemployed in October. So I was kind of getting desperate for employment. So
Right.
I thought, well, I'll go ahead and take this job, and if it doesn't work out, at least I can be looking for another job that maybe pays better or something I like a little better if this job didn't turn out. And then 31 years later,
Right.
I was still there.
So, what was your thoughts? Everybody walks in that first day, you hear the door slam behind you. You think you know a little bit about what goes on in there, but you really don't when you walk in. So, what were some of your thoughts that first day?
Well, the first day I was placed with a supervisor, and my supervisor, I just kind of hung out with my supervisor all day, and walked around with her. She was a senior case manager at a medium security facility, and we shared an office together on the unit. And so I just kind of observed her, and she kind of gave me a tour of the facility first, and took me all over the compound. And then later on that afternoon, I just observed her interaction with inmates in the office there. And it was an experience I really wasn't anticipating. The first thing I really noticed was a number of African American inmates. I grew up in Norman, and Norman didn't have a whole lot of black people in it, and I think there was our graduating class. I think we probably had 700 or 800 students, and I think there was maybe 1 or 2 blacks in there. But when I walked in the prison, I noticed a large number of the black inmates, and that was the first thing that I noticed. And then I noticed the number of inmates. Seemed like there were hundreds and hundreds of inmates just walking around in an open compound. And it looked like it was very organized. They had work crews out on the yard. They were raking up the gravel between the sidewalks. They were raking up the leaves, picking up cigarette butts. It looked like it was a very organized and clean environment. It wasn't real noisy, real orderly. So the first day,
Absolutely,
it was too bad. I didn't see any stabbings or murders, or we didn't have any escapes on the first day.
So tell me about your career. You started off as a case manager. Of course, you'd been to college already, so you kind of walked in as a case manager. So walk me through your career there.
Okay. I started out at the Joseph Hart Correctional Center, south of Norman, medium security facility. And shortly after I started working, I was there for about 2 years, and then I was promoted to senior case manager. But I knew kind of early on, within the first 2 years, that I wanted to get involved in administration, doing something with the leadership of the agency. And the warden that was at the facility I was at had just been promoted to a regional director up at central office. And he had posted a position as his administrative assistant to him. And so I applied for that job, and I interviewed, and I didn't get selected. But the chairman of the interview committee called me and said, we aren't going to recommend you for this position, but there's another position that he said, I think you would fit in real good. And he said you would just have to take a lateral transfer, but he said you'd get your foot in the door working in a deputy director's office, and so I'm certainly willing to do that just for the experience. And so I was able to transfer into his office, and I was tasked with writing correspondence for his signatures to inmates, to inmate families, to legislators, to other DOC officials, to the general public. Also, I was tasked with keeping we were getting all our facilities accredited with the American Correctional Association. So he put me in charge of the accreditation process. He was in charge of about half of the facilities in Oklahoma. They ranged from minimum security up to maximum security. And so he also had me doing grievances, inmate grievances, preparing responses for them, developing policies and procedures, working a little bit on the budgets. And then the longer I worked for him and the more experience I got, he gave me more responsibilities in different areas like budget, personnel issues, and he would go out to the facilities, and normally he would take me with him. And that was always a learning experience to see him interacting with the wardens and other facility staff and some of the issues that they had. And as issues came up, we had one facility that started having a rash of escapes, and it went on for quite a while. And so the regional director had me go back 10 years and research all the previous escapes from that facility. And so I did that. And then after I got all the data together, it was real eye-opener to see what the common denominators are in the escapes in regards to the time of day they escape, the job that the inmates had, that those that did escape, was it on the weekday, weekends?
Do you remember
what time of day? How long had they been at the facility?
Do you remember any of that?
Previous escape history, and so we gathered all. Oh, absolutely, yes. I knew that the inmates typically worked in maintenance, so they had access to tools, Class A tools, Class B tools. They had access to them. And then on the day of the week had normally happened on the weekend when there was less staff and you had visitation going on. There was one area that all the inmates were escaping from because we found out that was the easiest and the weakest area of the facility. They had put up some raised wire, but there was one blind spot that you couldn't see, and that's where the inmates were going over the fence at, either going through the fence or over the fence. And so they were able to beef that area and hone in on some of these other common denominators, and that it reduced the escapes. We also looked at policies and procedures, and we got staff input in regards to what we need to do to enhance the policies and procedures, and we got feedback from the experts. And those experts, as you well know, is a line correctional officers, and they can tell you the best way to do it, the safest way to do it, and the most efficient way to do it. So we basically got a lot of input from the staff, and we revised our policies and procedures. The warden also had the deputy warden and the chief start driving around perimeter at night too. And instead of having one perimeter vehicle out, they had two out. And they did that for about a year and basically eliminated any further escape. So I still talk to that regional director even today, and he still brings that up and talks about that. Probably the greatest thing that I can take away from my career with the Department of Corrections is my continuous admiration and respect for the correctional officer, being around them day in and day out, watching them do what they do, some of the challenges they've got dealing with shift work, but trying to be a husband, trying to be a father, basically risking their lives to protect the public, employee, and offenders as well. I just got to the point where I had a lot of respect and admiration for them. I think it's a calling. Not everybody can do it. And those that it's not for them, I think they find out pretty quick that it's not for them. But those that stick with it, I think they're there for a reason. And it's the public doesn't really get to see the great things that they do because they're so isolated from the public. But me seeing them firsthand, I've got the greatest admiration and respect for them.
Absolutely. And I know that there's a lot of correctional officers out there that appreciate hearing that. It is important that and that's why I think people like you that write those books and get those out in the public so people can see, what prison's about and get to hear those stories and understand that there's not just this thing over there behind the wall, but there's a bunch of people behind that wall working day in and day out 24/7. And if the public can ever understand that the reason they get to go to sleep and put their head on their pillow without, crime going on inside their house is because of those people who stand that wall and who stand that watch. Yeah. And that's why it's so important that people like you come out with those books and talk about that stuff. So I thank you for that.
You bet.
So what was the next step you took?
The legislatures, we were short-staffed in the facilities, and so some of the legislators said the central office was too top-heavy, and so they had to reduce the staffing in the central office and put some of those people back out in the field. And so the regional director came to me and gave me several options. He said I could go to medium security facility and be a procedures officer, writing policies and procedures. Another option would be go to our central classification division, which is housed at Lexington, about a mile away from the facility I started at, and become a classification auditor. And so I thought I was learning to do a lot of research and deal with a lot of data in reviewing escapes. So the auditing piece kind of fell in with that, I thought. And so I said, well, I'd like to be a classification auditor. And so I had the opportunity to do that and learned a great deal about auditing and databases and entering data and looking at trends and things of that nature. I was there for about a year and a half in the administrative assistant job that I originally applied for with the regional director. Came open again. And so I applied for that and got that job. And so I was only there for about a month. And the maximum security facility was having a lot of stabbings, a lot of violence, a lot of staff assaults, inmate assaults. They just underwent a hostage situation. And so the director terminated the employment of the warden. And the director asked the warden to come up to Oklahoma City. Well, while that warden was en route to Oklahoma City, the director called up my regional director and said, I'm going to appoint you the warden of the state penitentiary effective immediately. And he says, I want you to go down the penitentiary. And so my boss really didn't have any time other than to go home and throw in some clothes in the suitcase and head for the penitentiary. Well, while all this was going on, he called me and told me what was going on. And he asked me to come down to the penitentiary with him to be his assistant to the warden. And he gave me a week. to be there. And so I said, okay. He also recruited the captain from the facility, Joseph Harp. He was a captain, and he hired him as his chief of security and gave him a week to be there. So once we got there, he basically started tightening up the facility with there was a lot of violence, a lot of unrest, morale problems, staffing issues, budget issues. And so we got to work trying to beef up the policies and procedures. And then 6 months later, there was a riot. That was in December 17th, 1985. There were 7 hostages taken. The inmates took over two units, took 7 hostages. And that ordeal lasted about 18 hours. After that riot, and three officers were seriously injured, and they all had serious injuries. And one guy got stabbed 11 times, lost his eye. Another guy got his throat slit. He survived that. Another officer got his back broke and lacerated his liver, and had a broken jaw, and he suffered injuries that he never recovered from. But as soon as that riot happened, Warden Maynard, Gary Maynard was his name, he basically locked down the facility. And we went on a 23-hour lockdown. And this was in 1985. And that lockdown still exists today. And we figured that those inmates that come to the penitentiary, they have earned their way to the penitentiary. They've got to earn their way back out by good behavior. So we developed a level system, level 1 through 4, and it was based on, as you increase, based on good conduct, good work history, good program participation, didn't have any misconducts, then you can increase your level. And the higher the level you went, the more privileges you were able to obtain. Once you got up to the highest level, level 4, you could go to work, but you basically had to earn your way to gain that privilege. It was a decision who was running the penitentiary. Was it the staff or the inmates? And it was based on control in who was going to have control. We thought we'd have a lot of issues out of the older inmates, but it was kind of just the reverse. The older inmates were really glad the facility was locked down because they were having a lot of issues dealing with the younger inmates, because we were getting in the younger inmate that the older inmates weren't really used to. They were young, coming in on drug charges. This was in the mid 80s, 85 or so. And so the older inmates were really getting threatened by the younger inmates, so they didn't feel safe. So when it was locked down, then the older inmates, they kind of laid back and said, well, I feel safe now.
Yeah, a lot of people forget that the late 80s and early 90s, crack cocaine laws were coming in, and a lot of our prisons were becoming violent like they hadn't been since early in the 70s. I was working at Missouri State Pen in the early 90s, and it was a very violent time then. But you take a look at, the federal prisons had several riots, some of the worst riots they had during that time period. And it was a violent time to work in prisons.
Right. Yeah. Not only was it nationwide, just in the United States, worldwide, they were having prison riots in other countries as well. The UK had some serious riots, and other countries as well.
So talk to me about Oklahoma State Penitentiary now. I'm gonna probably bring up some stuff because most of what I know from OSP is media. There's been a rodeo there for a long time. That's always shown up in the media. The movie, what was it? with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor,
JW.
Gone Crazy. That was a big thing. Tell me about some of the stuff,
Right.
because it seems like Oklahoma State Penitentiary's kind of done things a little bit different than some of the others, and in a positive way, but they're kind of known for that kind of programming and extracurricular stuff, you might say.
Right. And certainly the most notable probably is the rodeo. The rodeo started in 1940 by the warden Jess Dunn. And at that time, Texas Department of Corrections had a rodeo, a prison rodeo. And so he was intrigued with what Texas was doing, because they were basically using the rodeo as a means to raise funding for indigent inmates, to help them get prosthesis, eyeglasses, hearing aids, weight equipment, movie projectors, other type of recreational equipment, just to offset the operating budget. And Texas was very successful at doing that. So Jess Dunn started his first one in 1940. And unfortunately, that was the only one he got to see, because before he could see the second rodeo, he was kidnapped, taken hostage on the yard by several inmates. And they basically marched him out of the East Gate and demanded that the warden tell the tower guards to lower the weapons as a means to escape. They escaped. They took an employee's vehicle that was just outside the gate. Local law enforcement found out about it, and they rushed to the scene just outside the prison, and they got into a chase, and it lasted just a few blocks away, and they had a shootout. The warden was shot in the head and killed. And but the rodeo, went ahead and went on. They had one in 41, and in 42 they had a rodeo, and every year it gained popularity, and it got so popular they were having to turn people away. I mean, thousands of people away. At one point, 5,000 people had to be turned away because that they were already at capacity. But during World War II, they suspended the rodeo from 1943 to 1948, and then they resumed in 1949, and then they had a riot in 1973. It was the most destructive riot in U.S. history at the time, with $20 million worth of damage. And so they suspended the rodeo until 1976, and then it resumed in 76. And then it carried on until the year 2009. So from 1940 to 2009, they had 62 rodeos. And it got to the point where the arena needed a lot of maintenance. Attendance was dropping. It was getting more and more difficult to staff the rodeo with everything else going on. And so as a result of that, they decided to discontinue it. But in recent times, there's been some interest from the governor, from the city of McAlester, the Chamber of Commerce, and with the Oklahoma Department of Corrections to try to restart that rodeo again. And they had some guy come in to see what it would take to get the arena back up, and they estimated around $8 million is the figure I heard. So right now, the holdup is just trying to find funding. But there seems to be a lot of interest to maybe restart that. But I started with the renewed interest in it. Yeah, I wrote a book on the history of the rodeo, and I've got the third edition out, and so I'm going back through it now, and I'm learning things I never knew before. Like the first escape that occurred, I was there at the penitentiary 3 different times, And I never knew that an inmate had ever escaped during a rodeo. But when I was doing my research, I found an inmate that escaped in the 1940s, in the late 1940s. And the guy that escaped, his name was Ray Sellers, and his brother-in-law was Clyde Barrow, and with Bonnie and Clyde, you know.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't even know he was there. Yeah. And then there was another escape in 1957, and where an inmate had got in the arena floor and walked out with the Cowboys at the end of the rodeo. And later they caught him, but I'd been there 3 different times and never knew that they ever had an inmate escape. But the history is really intriguing with that rodeo. And then I found out there was like 8 other states that had prison rodeos too.
Well, I didn't know that. Oklahoma, when everybody talks about a prison rodeo, they always talk about Oklahoma. So I never knew that either. The other media reference that I always run into is The Longest Yard with Burt Reynolds. He looks over at the one guy and he says, where'd you play? He said, I used to play at Oklahoma State. And after they prompt him a little bit, he goes, Oklahoma State Penitentiary. And I always thought that was hilarious. I remember that line. Yes.
Well, they had a great football team back in the 50s and 60s. They would even actually have other teams come in to play football. And the football team would actually go out to other towns and cities and play football against other teams. They also had boxing matches where they would fight, have boxing matches against each other, and there was a lot of recreational opportunities there. And then they had a lot of prison bands too. They had a full orchestra. They had country and western music bands. They had all kinds of musical bands that entertain not only other inmates but also the public.
Right. So you go back to Oklahoma State Penitentiary as the warden? Is that their next step?
From there, when I was the assistant, the warden that I was working for became the director. And when he became a director, he sent me to a minimum security as a deputy warden. And then I was a deputy warden at a minimum security facility for about, it's probably about 9 months. And there was a medium security facility close by that just underwent a riot. This was in 1988. And there again, hostages were taken. Major destructive occurred there as well, and so they asked me to be the warden there to rebuild the facility, and so I became warden there, and I was there for about 3 years, and I really didn't feel like I was a warden. I felt more like a construction foreman because we were doing demolition, we were rebuilding, we were looking at physical plants. There was an issue with the hostages. During this period of time, that medium security facility was pretty much open bay. And so staff didn't feel safe having medium security inmates in an open environment. So they asked me to get a committee together of staff to include some of the hostages and go around the country and find a prison's physical makeup that the staff would feel safe to work in. And so we went to several states and looked at different physical plants. And we went to Chillicothe, Ohio, and saw one of their modern prisons that looked like a bow tie shape. And they had individual cells.
Right.
They had a control panel in the center of each quad. And the staff really liked that physical environment. You could lock up inmates if you needed to. You had the control center that was right there on the pod, had great visibility, didn't have any blind spots. So we took that concept back, and the Department of Corrections in the state approved that, and so we started building several units based off that design. I was there for about 3 years. Then the warden of the penitentiary was in the National Guard. He got called up during Desert Storm. So since I was closed, they asked me to come serve as interim warden until he got back from his detail. And so I was there as interim for about 7 months. He comes back from Desert Storm. I go back to the medium security facility. He gets promoted to a deputy director, and then they moved me back up to the penitentiary as full-time warden. So I go back for the third time, and then I was there for about 3 years, from 91 to 94. And then after that,
Wow.
They were having a lot of issues with overcrowding. We were getting to the point of triple selling, and so they developed a population management unit and asked me to take over that unit and try to put some things in place to try to control the inmate population coming in. And so I took that job. I was there for 5 years, and then I took a job with Internal Affairs as an assistant deputy director. I oversaw the intelligence unit, our communications unit, fugitive apprehension team, and we had a security detail for central office. I oversaw that as well, and I was there for about 5 years, and then I was getting near towards retirement, and there was one area I had an interest in, but I never worked in, and that was in community corrections. I had worked in max, medium, minimum, worked in central office a couple of times. But I wanted to have a chance to work in community corrections. So a friend of mine was deputy director over at community corrections. And so I asked him, I said, do you have something I can do for you? And he goes, sure. And so I was the administrator of community corrections and oversaw a number of halfway houses, community correctional centers. They even had a contract with the Oklahoma County Jail on the 10th floor. We had medium security inmates that were contracted out by the Department of Corrections. And I don't know how that deals with the community, but they put that under me as well. And I had an administrator to run that on a daily basis. But I did that for about 6 years before I retired. But I really enjoyed that because, as you certainly know, when you work in the higher securities, when those inmates leave, a lot of times you see them come back, but you would never get to see any of the reentry or any of the success stories that the inmates have. But in the community, I got a taste of that. I got a taste of what the department was trying to do with reentry and trying to reduce the recidivism. And you're more introduced into programs rather than security, which was totally new to me, and I was fascinated by it. And so some of the programs worked, others worked better than others, but that was fascinating. I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it. And the reason why I stayed with the department for so long is because I never stayed in one spot very long. The longest place I stayed was 6 years. I was always moving, always learning different jobs, and it just kept my interest. I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. People don't realize how many opportunities they are in our profession. A lot of people just have that focus that, everybody's a prison guard. Well, not everybody's a prison guard. You have choices. Everything that you could find in a city is inside that prison. And you certainly took advantage of that over the years, going to the different areas and moving up through the chain and getting to see everything from maximum to minimum. And I see from listening to your story how you kind of got into research and this history, but when did it come into your mind that you wanted to try to put some of this in a book?
Well, I went back in 2005. I went back to school to get my master's degree because I was thinking, well, after I retire, I might want to teach criminal justice, just for some extra income if I needed to. And so I was in a class, and the professor asked me, he knew I worked for the Department of Corrections. He said, "Do you mind writing me a paper?" And he said, there's no minimum amount and there's no maximum amount. He said, just write me a paper. And he said, if you do that, I'll give you 13 college credits for it. And I said, great. And so I started writing it, and I really didn't know where to start out at. And so I just started from the beginning. About when I was in the 8th grade, I had to do that book report, and I found a book on prisons. And then I just kind of went and told about my work experience, some of the things I'd seen and done. And by the time I finished it, the paper was like 75 pages long or so. And so I turned it in. I got the 13 college credit hours. And so I started thinking, I was still working. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to keep on adding more to this book. I've already started this book. I've got a lot of it already done. And so as I worked for the next six or seven more years, I just kept on adding to the book. So by the time I retired, the book was done. And that was on the other side of the bars.
There you go.
And then after I retired, I started doing audits for the American Correctional Association as an auditor. And during this time, I was going through the Bible. I was trying to get my son to read the Bible, and he wasn't doing it fast enough. So I thought I'd help him along a little bit. So every day I'd read the Bible and type up my notes as to what the Bible says, what my son should do or not do. And so after, when I was in the middle of that, I was doing these audits at all these prisons around the country, and I'd see these inmates in the day room with the Bibles open. And I knew the inmate's reading level was about 7th grade, And I talked to an inmate, and he said, I don't know anything about the Bible. He said, I just opened this up. He was in the Old Testament, and he said, I started reading it. He said, I kind of got lost in it and closed it and lost interest in it. And well, a lot of times I open up the Old Testament, I get lost in it. And so I thought, I should, all these notes I'm making up for my son on what the scripture says, how someone should lead their life. I said, this would be a great guideline for inmates. And so I started tailoring that and writing it to fit inmates. And I found a local publisher in Oklahoma. Yep. They published it for me, and they titled it Caged Wisdom, Learning to See Through the Bars. And so I developed a prison ministry, and my goal was to send that book to every prison in the United States, every prison, federal, state, private prison. And my publisher found out what I was doing, and they were a Christian publisher, and they said, let us help you, and we will print the books up for you, and we'll pay for the postage to send these books out. And so I was getting people to buy a book, and I said, if you buy a book, I'll donate that book to any prison of your choosing. And so we raised funds, and we were able to put that book in every prison in the United States. And so then I just started writing more books. I would think of something else, and now I've got about 25 books now. But Mike, I'm on my last book, and it's on the history of the warden's mansion.
Okay. Interesting. I didn't know you had that many books. I have read On the Other Side of the Bars, your lessons learned, that first book as a prison warden. And that's got some great insight in it. It's got some good pictures in it, and definitely covers a lot of the history of Oklahoma State Penitentiary, and as well as the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. For those of you listening, I will put links to the books and where you can go on Amazon or go on the internet and get his books, Dan's books, because he's got a lot of great books and some more that I'm going to buy and finish up because I haven't seen all of them myself. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this out. We're having a little bit of connection problems with Dan here, but I'd like to get you back on the show if we can do that. I'd like to talk about some of these other books. You said you're working on the one about the governor's mansion. Tell everybody where they can find your books at. Where would be a good place if they want to go pick up one of your books on the internet?
Yeah, that last book I'm writing is about the warden's mansion at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. But you can find my books anywhere books are sold. You can go online. Just type in Dan, middle initial is M, Reynolds, Reynolds. You can find several of my books there. If people want to contact me through email, my email address, and it's dan1reynolds@yahoo.com.
Excellent. And like I said, I'll put all that in the show notes. So if you guys want to take a look there and you can see contact information and where to get those books on Dan. Dan, I can't thank you enough. I don't know if we've got weather moving in or something, but it's messing with our internet connection. But I can't thank you enough for coming on here today and talking to us. Fascinating story. And I'm looking forward to having you back on if you don't mind. Oh,
you bet. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And I've had the opportunity to listen to several of your podcasts, and I'm certainly a fan.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much. That means a lot. Have a good day, Dan Reynolds. We'll talk at you soon.
All right. Thanks, sir.
I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors that make the Prison Officer podcast possible. Omni RTLS is a company that I've been working with for the last year. I am proud to be part of this team of correctional professionals who have developed the best real-time locating system on the market today. With Omni's real-time location technology, you automatically know the accurate locations and interactions of all inmates, staff, and assets anywhere in your correctional facility, and you have this information in real time. Omni is cutting-edge software for today's jails and prisons. It is the only way to monitor every square inch of your facility while still being PREA compliant. Go to www.omnirtls for more information and to make your facility safer today. That's www.omnirtls.com. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.